I was traveling alone for work and had to stay in a hotel for the night. The hotel was old, but it looked nice enough from the outside. I was tired from a long day, so I just wanted a place to sleep. When I checked in, the man at the front desk gave me a key to room 104. He didn't smile, and something about him made me feel uneasy, but I ignored it. I took the key and headed to my room. The hallway was quiet, with old carpets that muffled my footsteps. The air felt heavy, and there was a strange smell, like something was old and rotting, but I couldn't tell where it was coming from. When I got to my room, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and simple: a bed, a nightstand, a lamp, and a bathroom. Everything looked clean, but it felt like no one had stayed there for a long time. The air was stale, and the silence was unnerving. I put my bag down and sat on the bed. It creaked loudly under my weight. I was tired, so I decided to go to bed early. I didn't even bother to turn on the TV. I just wanted to sleep. As I lay in bed, I started to feel like something was wrong. The silence was too loud, if that makes sense. It was as if the room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then, I heard it. A faint sound like soft footsteps coming from the hallway. They were slow and steady, getting closer to my room. My heart began to race. I told myself it was just another guest walking to their room, but something about the footsteps felt wrong. They stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The silence returned, and I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then I heard the doorknob rattle. It was a gentle sound, like someone was trying to open the door quietly. My eyes shot open, and my heart pounded in my chest. The door didn't open, but the rattling continued, slow and deliberate. I wanted to call the front desk, but my phone was across the room and I was too scared to move. Finally, the rattling stopped. I lay there, frozen in fear, listening to the silence. Then, I heard a soft whisper, so faint that I almost didn't catch it. It was a single word: "Let me in." I jumped out of bed and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. I called the front desk, but no one answered. I tried again, but it just rang and rang. The whisper came again, louder this time. "Let me in." I ran to the door and looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, but I could still feel the presence of something just outside my door, waiting. I backed away from the door and sat on the bed, trying to calm myself down. I told myself it was just a nightmare, that I was imagining things. But then I saw the doorknob turn, slowly, as if someone was trying to open the door from the outside. My heart raced, and I could feel cold sweat on my forehead. The door was locked, but the doorknob kept turning, back and forth. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping it would keep whatever was outside from getting in. The doorknob stopped turning, and the room went silent again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair, watching the door, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed my bag and ran out of the room. The hallway was empty, and the strange smell was gone. I rushed down to the lobby, where the same man from the night before was at the front desk. "I'm checking out," I said, my voice trembling. He nodded and handed me the bill without a word. I wanted to ask him if he had heard anything strange during the night, but something in his eyes told me not to. It was as if he already knew what had happened. I left the hotel and never looked back. Even now, I can't explain what happened that night. All I know is that something was outside my door, something that wanted to come in, and I'm glad I never let it in. I was on a long road trip and needed a place to stay for the night. After driving for hours, I saw a small hotel on the side of the road. It wasn't fancy, but it looked clean, and I was too tired to keep driving. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed my bag, and walked into the lobby. A woman with short gray hair was sitting behind the front desk. She looked up and gave me a tired smile. "Do you have a room available?" I asked. "Yes, we do," she replied. "Room 303 is open. It's one of our best rooms." She handed me a key and told me how to find the room. I thanked her, took the key, and headed up the stairs to the third floor. The hotel was quiet, and the hallway was dimly lit. As I walked, I noticed that the walls were lined with old paintings, but the faces in the paintings seemed strange, almost as if they were watching me. I tried to ignore the creepy feeling and kept walking until I reached room 303. The door creaked as I opened it, and I stepped inside. The room was simple, with a bed, a small desk, and a chair by the window. There was a large mirror on the wall, which made the room feel bigger than it was. Everything seemed normal, but the air in the room felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. I set my bag on the bed and looked around. There was nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I was too tired to think much about it, so I decided to take a shower and then go to bed. The bathroom was small, with a sink, toilet, and shower. As I turned on the water, I heard a soft humming sound, like someone was singing quietly. I paused and listened, but the sound stopped. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the pipes. After my shower, I got into bed and turned off the lights. The room was dark, but the moonlight from the window gave everything a faint, eerie glow. I closed my eyes and tried to fall asleep, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. Everything was still and silent, but when I glanced at the mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a shadowy figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching me. I sat up quickly and turned on the bedside lamp, but when I looked again, the figure was gone. The room was empty, but I could still feel eyes on me. My heart was racing and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to leave, but it was the middle of the night, and I didn't know where else to go. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, that I was tired and seeing things. I turned off the lamp and lay back down, but I couldn't stop thinking about the figure in the mirror. I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. As I lay there, I started to hear the humming sound again, but this time it was louder. It sounded like it was coming from right outside the door. My body tensed up, and I held my breath, listening. The humming continued, and then I heard a soft knock on the door. I froze, too scared to move. The knock came again, louder this time. I slowly got out of bed and walked to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, but the humming continued, echoing in my ears. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. Suddenly, the mirror caught my eye again. I turned and saw the figure standing in the reflection, closer this time, its face hidden in shadow. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room, not bothering to turn off the lights. I ran down the stairs and into the lobby, where the woman at the front desk was still sitting. "I can't stay here," I said out of breath. "Something's wrong with that room." The woman looked at me with a knowing expression. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "Saw what?" I replied, confused and scared. "The ghost of room 303, she said. "You're not the first one to see it. That room. It's haunted." I stared at her in shock. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded. She sighed, looking sad. "We don't have many guests and we need the business, but I can see that you're too scared to stay. I'll refund your money." I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to get out of there. I grabbed my things and left the hotel, driving away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was far away, and even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. That night, I stayed at a different hotel, but I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadowy figure from room 303, standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with eyes I couldn't see. I recently moved into a new city for a fresh start and found a job that offered me temporary accommodation at a small old hotel in the city center. It was a quiet place, far from the hustle and bustle, and seemed like a perfect spot to get some rest after long workdays. The hotel had a peculiar charm with its creaky wooden floors and vintage furniture. The staff was polite, though there weren't many of them around. It seemed like the hotel had seen better days, but it was comfortable enough. One evening, after coming back from work, I noticed something strange. As I was heading to my room, I passed by a door that I hadn't noticed before. It was room 212. The odd thing was that the door was different from the others. It was made of heavy, dark wood, and there were several locks on it, more than any other door in the hotel. All the locks were old and rusted, but the door itself looked like it was still in use. Curiosity got the better of me. I asked the hotel receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. White, about the room. "Why does room 212 have so many locks on it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mrs. White's expression changed. She looked uneasy, almost scared. "That room is off limits," she said quietly. "Please, stay away from it." Her response only made me more curious. "Why is it off limits?" I pressed. Mrs. White hesitated before answering. "It's for your own safety," she finally said. "Just trust me on this." I didn't ask any more questions, but the mystery of room 212 stayed in my mind. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would a hotel room need so many locks? What was inside? One night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to that locked door. The hotel was silent, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the old clock in my room. I got out of bed, pulled on my robe, and decided to take a walk around the hotel to clear my head. As I wandered the dimly lit halls, I found myself standing in front of room 212 again. The door seemed to loom in the darkness, almost daring me to get closer. Before I knew it, I was reaching out to touch the cold metal locks. My fingers brushed against the locks, and I felt a strange tingling sensation. The door felt colder than the rest of the hallway, as if something inside was draining the warmth from the air. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't help myself. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for any sound. At first there was nothing but silence, but then, faintly, I thought I heard a noise, like someone moving around inside the room. My heart skipped a beat. Was someone in there? I quickly stepped back, my heart racing. I didn't want to get caught snooping, so I hurried back to my room and locked the door behind me. But sleep was impossible that night. I kept thinking about what I had heard. Was someone locked inside room 212? And if so, why? The next day, I couldn't focus on anything at work. All I could think about was that room. When I returned to the hotel, I decided I needed answers. I waited until late at night, when I knew the staff would be asleep, and then I made my way back to room 212. I had brought a small flashlight with me this time, and I used it to inspect the locks. They were old and rusted, but still functional. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small set of tools. I had never picked a lock before, but I had seen it done in movies. How hard could it be? With trembling hands, I inserted the tools into the first lock. It took me a while, but eventually I heard a faint click as the lock released. Encouraged, I moved on to the next one. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to unlock all the locks on the door. I took a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open. The room was dark and cold, much colder than the hallway. I shone my flashlight around, revealing a small empty room with nothing but a bed and a dresser. The bed was made, and everything looked perfectly normal. But something felt off. As I stepped inside, the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I spun around, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I realized that I was locked inside. I pounded on the door, yelling for help, but no one came. The hotel was silent. I tried to stay calm and shone my flashlight around the room again, looking for another way out. But then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Scratches on the walls, deep gouges, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. My heart raced as I backed away from the walls. I stumbled over something and looked down to see a small, tattered book on the floor. I picked it up and opened it, shining the flashlight on the pages. The handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, but I could make out some of the words. The book was a diary, and the entries spoke of someone being trapped in the room, locked in by the hotel staff. The writer had gone mad, unable to escape, and the last few pages were filled with frantic scribbles and drawings of eyes, always watching. I dropped the book, horrified. That's when I heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from the corner of the room. I turned slowly, my flashlight trembling in my hand. There, in the corner, was a figure crouched on the floor. It was the shape of a person, but its limbs were twisted, and its face was hidden in shadow. The figure moved slightly, and I could see its hands, long, thin fingers with sharp, broken nails, covered in dried blood. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as the figure slowly lifted its head. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze on me, piercing and malevolent. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the hallway light flooded the room. I was yanked out of the room by Mrs. White, who had a look of pure terror on her face. "What have you done?" she screamed, as she slammed the door shut and hastily locked all the locks. I was too shaken to respond. My mind was reeling from what I had just seen. "You should never have opened that door," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That room is cursed. It has been for years. No one who enters that room ever comes out the same." "You were lucky I heard you." Mrs. White's words filled me with dread. I left the hotel that night, not bothering to pack my things. I didn't care about the job, the city, or anything else. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. To this day, I still have nightmares about that figure in the corner of room 212, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching me, waiting for the day when I'm alone again. I had been driving for hours. The rain was coming down hard, making it almost impossible to see the road. My eyes felt heavy, and all I wanted was to find a place to rest. Just when I thought I'd have to keep driving all night, I spotted a small sign by the side of the road. It read, "Riverside Inn, vacancy." I turned my car into the narrow driveway, splashing through puddles as I approached the old building. The inn looked ancient, with its wooden walls looking like they had seen better days. A dim light flickered from one of the windows, casting strange shadows on the ground. I parked the car and grabbed my bag from the back seat. As I walked toward the entrance, I couldn't help but notice how quiet everything was, too quiet. There were no other cars in the parking lot, and the forest around the inn seemed still, like it was holding its breath. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The lobby was small and dark, lit only by a single lamp on the front desk. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and the air smelled of old wood and dust. "Hello?" I called out, but my voice seemed to get swallowed up by the silence. I waited a moment before a tall, thin man appeared from a door behind the desk. His face was pale, and his eyes were dark and sunken, like he hadn't slept in days. "Good evening," he said in a low, raspy voice. "Welcome to Riverside Inn. Do you need a room?" "Yes, please," I replied, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling in my chest. "Just for the night." He nodded and handed me a key. "Room 12 upstairs, enjoy your stay." I thanked him and took the key, noticing how cold it felt in my hand. The man didn't smile or say anything else, just watched me as I headed toward the stairs. As I climbed the creaky steps, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whole place felt wrong, like it was hiding some kind of secret, but I was too tired to care. I just wanted to sleep. When I reached room 12, I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small and plain, with a single bed, a dresser, and a window covered by heavy curtains. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, letting out a long sigh. It wasn't the nicest place I'd ever stayed, but it would do for the night. After changing into some dry clothes, I lay down on the bed. The mattress was hard and uncomfortable, but I didn't care. I was too tired to be picky. I closed my eyes, hoping to fall asleep quickly, but as soon as I did, I heard it, a faint sound, like someone whispering just outside my door. I sat up, listening carefully. The sound stopped. Maybe it was just the wind, I told myself, trying to ignore the goosebumps on my arms. I lay back down and closed my eyes again, but the whispering started once more, a little louder this time. It was definitely coming from outside my room. My heart started to race. I wasn't alone. Slowly I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I pressed my ear against it, trying to make out the words, but it wasn't in English or any language I recognized. It was more like a chant, low and steady, like someone was repeating the same phrase over and over. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I wasn't sure if I wanted to open it, but I had to know who or what was out there. Taking a deep breath, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The hallway was empty. The only sound was the creaking of the old wooden floor under my feet. I looked left and right, but there was no one there. The whispering had stopped. Feeling uneasy, I closed the door and locked it behind me. I wasn't sure what I had heard, but I didn't want to think about it. I crawled back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. This time I forced myself to keep my eyes shut, blocking out the strange feeling that something was watching me. Eventually exhaustion took over, and I drifted off to sleep. I woke up to the sound of knocking. It was soft at first, then louder, like someone was trying to get my attention. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. It was still dark outside, and the room was freezing. The knocking continued, coming from the door. I didn't want to answer it, but I couldn't just ignore it either. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked to the door. I hesitated for a moment, then called out, "Who is it?" No answer, just more knocking. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The hallway was dark, but I could make out a figure standing there. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned gown, her long hair hanging over her face. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't answer. She just stood there, her head slightly tilted, as if she was listening to something I couldn't hear. The longer I looked at her, the more I felt like something was very wrong. Suddenly, she lifted her head, and I saw her face clearly for the first time. Her eyes were hollow, dark pits, and her skin was pale and stretched tight over her bones. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, her lips moved silently, forming words I couldn't understand. I stepped back, fear gripping my chest. The woman took a step forward, crossing the threshold into my room. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was frozen in place, unable to look away from her. She reached out with one hand, her fingers long and bony, and touched my arm. Her touch was ice cold, sending a shiver down my spine. I gasped and jerked away, but she didn't let go. I tried to pull free, but she was stronger than she looked. Her grip tightened, and I felt a sharp pain shoot through my arm. I cried out, struggling to break free, but it was no use. And then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the woman let go. She stepped back into the hallway, her expression blank and empty. For a moment, we just stared at each other, neither of us moving. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands trembling. My heart was racing, and my arm throbbed where she had touched me. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew one thing: I had to get out of there. I didn't waste any time. I threw my clothes into my bag and grabbed my keys from the nightstand. I wasn't going to stay another minute in that place. The fear was like a thick fog, clouding my thoughts, but one thing was clear: I needed to leave. I rushed to the door, but as I reached for the doorknob, the lights flickered and went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and I could barely see my hand in front of my face. Panic set in. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to guide me. The air felt thick, and it was getting harder to breathe, as if the walls were closing in on me. I managed to unlock the door and stepped out into the hallway. It was even darker out there, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to my car. As I hurried down the hallway, I could hear footsteps behind me. They were slow and deliberate, echoing off the walls. I didn't dare look back. I knew who, or what, was following me. I reached the stairs and practically flew down them, not caring if I tripped. The lobby was dark and empty, just as it had been when I first arrived. The man at the front desk was gone, and the silence was deafening. I pushed open the front door and ran outside. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet, and I nearly slipped as I ran to my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped them. Come on, I muttered to myself, picking up the keys and unlocking the car door. I jumped inside and slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing heavily. The rain had started again, tapping softly on the roof of the car, but I didn't feel safe, not yet. I started the car and put it in gear, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. The inn stood silent and dark, its windows like empty eyes watching me. I didn't see anyone behind me, but I could still feel her presence, like she was just out of sight, waiting. I hit the gas and sped down the driveway, not caring if I left anything behind. I just wanted to get as far away from that place as possible. As I drove away, I glanced in the mirror one last time. The Riverside Inn was barely visible through the rain, its outline fading into the darkness. I told myself I'd never come back. It wasn't until I was miles away that I finally let myself relax. The rain had stopped, and the road was clear again. The fear that had gripped me was starting to fade, but the memory of that woman's face was burned into my mind. I pulled into a gas station and parked the car, needing a moment to collect myself. I checked my arm where she had grabbed me, expecting to see a bruise or something. But there was nothing, just smooth skin. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? I didn't know, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to tell anyone about it. Who would believe me? As I drove away from the gas station, I tried to push the whole experience out of my mind. But I couldn't stop thinking about the woman, her empty eyes and the cold touch of her hand. I knew I would never forget that night. And I knew I'd never stay in a place like that again. A few days later, I was back home, trying to get back to my normal life. I had almost managed to convince myself that it had all been in my head. Then, one evening, I was watching the news, and something caught my attention. They were talking about an old inn that had burned down in a mysterious fire, the Riverside Inn. I felt a chill run down my spine. The report said that the inn had been abandoned for years, and that it had a dark history. They mentioned rumors of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings. But I didn't need to hear that to know the truth. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark, my heart pounding. The woman, the whispering, the fear. It had all been real. And I had barely escaped. I don't know what happened to the Riverside Inn or why it burned down. But I do know one thing. Some places are meant to be forgotten, and some guests are never meant to leave.